Hello, and welcome back to our Bible study on Isaiah. I am Nancy Springer, and I'm here with my friend and colleague David Matthews, and we are continuing our conversation through the book of the prophet Isaiah. And as we talked about in the previous video, we are going through this long section of oracles about the various nations. And so we're going to be talking about more where these fit historically and what can we learn about God's characteristics in these stories. So in this session, we're going to do a very short one, an oracle concerning the Philistines. And we are, well, before I start reading, Dave, I'll give you a chance to say hello. I don't mean to talk over you.
No, I didn't think you were. Hello, everyone. Glad to be here. And just second Nancy. Yeah, it's wonderful to read scripture together, and we are glad to be able to do that today.
All right. So we will begin reading in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 28. This oracle came in the year of King Ahaz's death. Don't rejoice, all you Philistines, that the rod that struck you is broken, because from the snake's root a viper will grow, and it will produce a winged creature. The oldest offspring of the poor will graze, their needy will lie down secure, but he will starve your offspring to death and murder all who remain. Wail, gate, cry out, city, melt in terror, all you Philistines. Smoke is coming from the north. There is no straggler in its ranks. What will one say to that nation's messengers? The Lord has founded Zion. The oppressed among God's people will find refuge there. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
All right. David, give us our historical setting here.
All right. Well, the Philistines, you've probably heard somebody called a Philistine at some point in your life, maybe. Usually it refers to an uneducated person. Historically, that's actually not quite true. The Philistines, you might remember them, they are actually in the Bible from quite an early place. They are one of the people groups that Moses and the Israelites are commanded to push out, to wipe out, to get out of the Holy Land. And of course, the people under Joshua enter into the promised land and they don't do it. In the end, they often end up making peace treaties with these people. And so the Philistines continue to hang around and to continue to be a thorn in the side of Israel, all through the time of Judges, even at times being oppressors to Israel. And of course, you probably remember that very famous Philistine, Goliath, from the city of Gath. And so the Philistines are a very common reoccurrence through Scripture. So here we see an oracle against them, noting that they have continued all the way along with Israel, that they themselves are going to be struck. And again, that they should not rejoice that Israel, or rather at this point, that Judah is going through hard times. And that's an important thing to note is that, of course, if there's a nation oppressing you, then when somebody else starts to oppress them or when they get beaten up, you're thinking to yourself, yes, this is excellent. Maybe we'll be free. But the reality is, no, a greater and worse oppressor is probably actually on their way. Uh, yes, in this case, Syria was probably a much worse ruler or a worse neighbor than Judah was, even if they were a little bit further away. Um, so the Philistines are going to have some trouble, we will say. A couple of other things to note is that the oracle came in the year of King Ahaz's death. King Ahaz was a king of Judah. The Bible very kindly says of him in Chronicles chapter 8 that he was not a good king, he was a bad king. I love how clear the Old Testament is of the kings of Judah. Good king,
Mhm.
bad king.
Right.
There's no negotiation between the two. You were one or the other. But one of the things King Ahaz is remembered for is basically falling in love with the gods of other nations. And specifically in this case, he falls in love with the gods of Damascus, or the nation of Syria, and he starts to worship them. He actually closes down the doors to the temple and actually takes their utensils, it calls them, which were the it's not. I keep thinking of like a knife and a fork, you know, as if God is having a meal. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
but the things used actually for the sacrifices to God, he takes them, and it says that he breaks them down, presumably into their elements, which were gold, and then he's probably uses the gold for something else. But what else he does is he sets up altars to these other gods all the way, all throughout Jerusalem. So this is again why he's listed under the bad kings. And when he dies at the age of 36, his son Hezekiah comes in, and Hezekiah, of course, is noted as a good king. And yeah, it's just a very important note for this time frame, because King Hezekiah is, of course, a king that in the first year of his reign starts to rectify this whole problem of altars to other gods, and he starts to get rid of them all and open the doors back up to the temple, and he starts to restore worship to Yahweh rather than to these Damascus and Syrian gods. So that's the time frame of when this oracle comes, and it's very nice that that it's given us a year as to where it's situated, unlike the last week's, the previous oracle, which just says an oracle of Isaiah. Um, so again, this is a time when when Syria and the northern kingdom are putting pressure on the southern kingdom, and they are scaring it, and you know, and Assyria. And so the question is, what to do? What is Judah's role going to be? How are they going to come out of this? And so Judah goes through problems, but and basically is oppressed themselves. But the question is Philistine going to bear any better? And so the Philistines at first are rejoicing. Yes, Judah is getting their comeuppance. Yes, they're being conquered. And but here the warning is: don't rejoice, because you're going to come up to your own here. And the the judgments here are pretty harsh. The oldest offspring of the poor will graze; their needy will lie down secure. But he will starve your offspring to death and murder all who remain. Like, that is not a joyful, happy, clappy prophecy here. This is about as horrible as it gets. And so, consequently, the warning, the oracle against the Philistines is no, you should actually be wailing and melting in terror of what is to come. Don't rejoice in the people you thought were mean to you falling, because someone far worse is coming along, and something far worse is coming along. So that's the warning and the historical context of where this prophecy sits.
And as with all the oracles, right, we hold God's justice in tension with God's mercy, and he ends it with, right, the Lord has founded Zion. So this ideal city and place, where the last shall be first and the first shall be last, right? Um, and the oppressed among God's people will find refuge there. Right? So again, he's including everyone under the category of God's people here, right? Those who had been oppressed, when they turn towards God and follow God's ways, right, they will be cared for and find refuge in God himself.
Hmm.
And so it's, we will get in this kind of this rhythm of these oracles as we go throughout the next few chapters of God's punishment with glimmers of hope mixed in. And
Mm-hmm.
so I just encourage us all to keep reading and to learn what we can about who God is and who we are as we read these things, because it is hard to read about the punishment and the difficult events that are going to come upon the folks and know that the Philistines, were told something worse. It's even going to get worse. So don't get excited. That would be a harsh thing to live with.
Nancy, what do you make of verse 32, where it says, "What will one say to that nation's messengers?" And it says, "The Lord has founded Zion. The oppressed among God's people will find refuge there." What does that sort of stand out? What stands out to you about that? And what does that mean to you? The Lord has founded Zion. The oppressed among God's people will find refuge there.
Well, I think it's God's call to everyone to turn towards him, right? To say, walk in my ways, do as I have instructed you to do, and I will give you refuge, right? I will protect you from, because isn't that really what God is saying he's going to do to his people, is I'm just going to remove my protection from you and let these evil nations around you come and conquer you, right? But if it's that hand extended in mercy, right, of God, that if you come to me and walk in my ways, I will give you refuge and I will protect you. I think that the sentence, "What will one say to that nation's messengers," right, is that there's still hope. There's always that opportunity to turn toward God, even in the midst of great despair that's coming.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
But I like to see everything through rose-colored glasses. So,
Yeah.
what do you think of it? Is that
I don't know. I'm asking. One of the things that stood out to me is just the question: "What will one say to the nation's messengers?" And the whenever there's a question in a prophecy like this, one needs to wonder: is the next line that come after it the answer of what you should say to the nation's messengers, or is that a rhetorical question? And that you're not supposed to have an answer to that, and now I'm going to declare, and so the next statement could be in contrast to it or could be the answer to it. And so I'm just kind of curious, because I liked your statement about what that next declaration means, because I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with it. But I do, what will one say to that nation's messengers? Um, well, to the nation of the Philistine, or to the nation again of who? And messengers usually, the word messengers translate can also be translated angels. Also, often is understood as prophets. And so, what will one say to that nation's prophets? Well, the nation of the Philistines, who are probably making the people rejoice. Well, remember that God is going to restore Zion. And so don't be like, God's work is never done. And part of his promise is to restore this holy city. And so don't rejoice that it's in rubble, because one day they will rise again, because that's what God's declared. And so we look to our eternal city and the state of the church sort of as a promise of this. And that even at times where there is churches being burned down, or destroyed, or entire Christian communities being persecuted and killed, a reminder that God's eternal city, God's city, God's kingdom of heaven will ultimately triumph.
Yeah. That's good. All right. Is there anything else in this very short little oracle that you want to bring out?
No, like all scripture, I'm sure we could talk about it for another hour or two.
Probably.
But I think I'm good.
All right. Same here. Well, we sure appreciate y'all participating and being a part of it. I want to invite folks to ask questions and engage and get your own small groups together, or just ask us questions in the comments below as you watch the videos that pop into your head. And we will continue on with these oracles beginning next week with chapters 15 and 16. And through chapter 23, when we get to the end of all of the oracles, we will do kind of a summary video, an extra video that wraps all this together. So if you do want to, I highly encourage you to keep going through all the oracles with us, the videos that we'll do over the next few weeks. But if you choose not to, just make sure you watch the summary video so you don't step into the movie halfway through in chapter 24. So, all right.
Absolutely.
We all have a blessed evening and enjoy your time today. And we'll see you in the next video.
God bless.
Bye.